Welcome to the Voices in Recovery podcast. Voices in Recovery is produced by Freedom's Path Recovery Society, a registered Canadian charity. If you enjoy the podcast, please consider a donation to Freedom's Path Recovery Society. All donations go directly to assisting Freedom's Path in providing their services free of charge and helps us keep the podcast going. We are grateful for any and all donations. This podcast discusses difficult topics such as childhood abuse, drug and alcohol use, sexuality and sexualized trauma, and more. If you are under the age of 18, please speak with your legal guardian prior to listening. The opinions expressed during the podcast are those of the individual and not those of Voices in Recovery or Freedom's Path or any other organization. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast.
This podcast is being recorded on the traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy. This consists of the Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, and the Blackfeet in the U.S. We acknowledge the Stoney Nakoda, which consists of the Bearspaw, Morley, and Chiniki. We acknowledge the Tsuut'ina Huardene and the Métis, Inuit, status and non-status from all of Turtle Island, and those who are visiting. We are all treaty people.
Alrighty then. It always says like we are recording and I have to say okay. I am okay with it.
Oh,
I
do
like
you?
yeah, I
Oh,
like
wow.
that it makes me make sure that the people who are there give consent.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I know it's hilarious, but it's probably a good idea.
Well, I think when COVID first hit and they had a whole lot of problems with that because people were recording when people thought they weren't, and then things were said, and bosses were angry.
Dude, I could see that happening, man. Like
Totally.
that would be the Wild West, eh? Like when 2020 hit, like the Wild West of like online meetings and group stuff.
Oh yeah.
And there were so many good bloopers from like the first year.
Oh yeah, so many people like forgot their cameras on, and
yeah, they did. They forgot. Yeah, and like seriously, I don't know what kind of creature we would have to be like maybe autoeroticism while on a Zoom meeting. Like I'm sorry. I think like I understand lust too. Like I am very lustful.
Sure.
I have been very lustful in my life. I just don't get that. Like I don't get it.
Honestly, though, it has to be the danger of possibly getting caught, or just like the biggest FU to your boss and coworkers or something, right?
See, that kind of shit makes sense to me. I dig it.
It's got to be that. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think like, I mean, either way, I'm not judging. I'm just saying it's one of those things that we all kind of noticed that there were some weird, weird. I won't say weird because they're just different. Some different habits that people have online, right?
That's right.
And of course, I think the first year of COVID was helpful that everybody was drunk all the time.
Well, and it's like somebody said, I heard a long time ago somebody talking about social media and how like we don't really have like societal rules about it. Like when you go to a hockey rink, there's like just we all know the general rules of how to behave.
Well, and there are unwritten rules, yeah.
Yeah, but when you get online, it's like rules for behavior. I don't know. So we're trying, and so like that early 2020 COVID stuff was just trial and error.
Dude, it was, man. Like those churches getting photo bombed and porn bombed with like images of disturbing pornography.
Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't find that not funny, except for some of the images obviously were not funny, right?
Yeah.
Because they're of children and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I'm speaking more of the adult pornography that was interjected into church services, like into their Zoom services. I find that kind of funny. Right?
Yeah. But I always find it interesting
some creepers out there.
I was gonna say that I'm always interested to know what kind of person is like, all right, today. Like the only way I can see that being really acceptable is if like you had a bunch of friends over and they're all like, no man, we're daring you to do this.
Okay, fair.
And then maybe, but like, man, that takes a lot of guts to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
I saw this guy,
man.
The most recent one
it takes a lot of guts and a lot of other
green screen behind him.
Yeah.
And then but he had it mounted to his to him on like shoulder straps. And then he mounted his camera on his like skidoo.
Yeah.
and he went friggin' skidooing, and he's in like a Zoom meeting. So they recorded it. So he posted like the side by side of what they're seeing and what he's doing.
Yeah.
It was awesome,
Dude, that's hilarious, man.
right?
Yeah, that's funny.
All right. So what should we talk
All
about
right.
tonight, Dave?
Well, you brought up something. So why
Yeah.
don't we talk about that first? I think like because I know, yeah, you go ahead, man. You just started off because you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, I was before we started recording. I had mentioned that something came across. I saw something in Tennessee where the governor, is given $10 billion more to their budget for the state. And I don't know, I just kind of clicked on it, and it was like because it said something about addiction services, and I thought, oh well,
Hmm.
let's see how much that's getting.
Yeah.
And it was pretty amazing to see how all the big numbers start at the top, and that just trickles down, and the zeros gets less and less till you get
Yeah.
to addiction and recovery services, which
Mm,
was out of that 10 million, a whopping $7 million for the entire state of Tennessee.
yeah.
And it just made me think. Like I started looking at Alberta's budget and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and it's just really telling how we will spend money fighting crime, we'll spend money
Hmm.
fighting addiction, arresting people, throwing them in, incarcerating them for
Hmm.
possession or
Yeah.
because they're using and they're kind of out of their mind or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But we won't spend any money to actually help people,
Yeah. And
or we do, but it's such a small amount.
well, it is a small amount, and that's an interesting question, man. Like, or an interesting, I don't know, subject, I guess. I'm
Yeah.
gonna try to channel my inner Dominic on this on my answer. Um, who, like, I guess the difficulty is always in deciding where the budget goes, right?
Hmm.
Like, what's, and I mean, don't get me wrong. Obviously, there needs to be some reprioritization of the budget, right? Like,
Yeah.
when something that we all think is essential, like social services, like we all,
Yep.
most of us think they're essential. I won't
Yeah.
say
Absolutely.
all. I,
Yeah.
I don't want to say all because I've met people who don't. And that's fair, right? Like they have a
Yeah.
right to believe in that.
For sure.
And I don't want to leave them out. Um, but of course, now I can't remember what we were talking about.
Well, I just think you were talking about how like we don't we tend to spend the money on the bigger on the
Yeah,
fighting
thank
it
you.
and not taking care of people.
Yeah, and I think like you mentioned before we started recording, the fight is over. Like what are we fighting now? I
Yeah.
think I think that's the key, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to fight crime. That's fine. You want to call it fighting crime or you want to be tough on crime. And that's
Hmm.
like Alberta's go-to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, since
Yeah.
I've been in
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
province, I have not experienced anything but a tough on crime province. Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
and maybe it's a tough on crime city. Um,
Sure.
but I think it's the whole province. Like I
Oh,
think
oh, it
there's
definitely is. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
rural Alberta, it's a huge thing, right? So,
yeah. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, we need policing. Like
absolutely. Yeah.
this is not an all or nothing thing.
No,
And I
no.
think the only reason we really do stop on law enforcement, right, for these budgets is
Hmm.
because the percentage is so overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just so much more than everything else. And
Well,
again,
and for me, it's like they're the front line of the government's
100%.
efforts. So it's like we'll spend money on hiring 5 more officers to further fight the war on drugs, but we won't spend the money to get 5 more people into recovery. And that to me is like that's where I have an issue with it. It's not that
Mhm,
yeah, we need a lot. There's a lot of crime going on, other than
mhm,
just But to me, I look at things like what impacts budgets across the board more. So when you look at
mhm.
like addiction and stuff like that, you're
Yeah,
impacting healthcare services,
yeah.
policing and justice services, social services sometimes.
Mhm,
Like you're impacting several areas of what the government spends money on.
yeah.
So I really think like if you look at it just on the justice side, you'd
Mhm,
probably still save money. But if you looked at it
mhm,
overall, treating illnesses and stuff like that, like addiction and things
mhm.
like that, rather than having more force to go fight it,
Yeah.
it would impact and lessen the burden on all those other departments of government.
Mhm.
So I don't
Well,
know. That's where I look at it.
dude, I hear you, man. I agree. I think the reprioritization of budget is one thing, But another thing is, how do we use that money, right? Like,
Yeah,
what are we
exactly.
doing with that? So you can put, as far as I'm concerned, we could have a huge part of the budget going to justice. But
Hmm.
if, and I'm going to put the caveat in there, that if justice includes rehabilitative services,
Yes,
right? And so what
absolutely.
I'm getting at is drug court, because I think drug
Yeah,
court is a phenomenal idea. It is a
yeah,
fantastic idea. Is it perfect? Of course not. Like these programs, anytime people go, oh yeah, but the success rate, I understand the success is low. You know why the success is low is because people keep saying success rate. They don't just
yeah,
focus on the fact that this is one leap away from the punitive history we have, right? It's one
exactly.
tiny leap, even though I think it's a pretty big leap for our justice
Hmm.
system to even have this, right?
Yep.
Especially in Alberta. When it came to
Oh yeah.
Alberta, I don't think there were very many people who weren't shocked. Like,
Yeah.
right? And don't get me wrong, man, there's Alberta has blossomed.
Hmm.
We have Indigenous court, right? We
Oh, that's
have
right. Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have so many different supports now in terms of justice.
Yep.
And and so I think that's why when you were talking about the stats, it's like I really want to be careful because we do have some pretty innovative things going on in Alberta.
Yes.
We're not perfect, man. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
we need more of what we have,
Yeah.
obviously, right? And probably less of what we don't need. I think
Yeah.
it's okay if we were to like trim some of the fat from everywhere of things
Oh,
that we
absolutely.
don't
Yeah.
need and funnel that into,
Yeah.
I think, direct care services, right, to humans.
Well, and I think it applies to me. It applies not just to like addiction and recovery.
Yeah.
Like when I look at things, like I look at how can we help people who are struggling.
Well, and I want
You-
to put some more money into mental health too, right? Like
exactly. Yeah.
we're not just talking about um, alcoholism or drug addiction. Like there's a
No.
gamut that topic covers. But
Absolutely.
then on top of that, we need to talk about mental illness because as far as I'm concerned, and of course the science will say it's not 100%, and I would
Hmm.
agree with that. But a good percentage of people who are in recovery have mental health difficulties, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of us have untreated mental health difficulties,
Yeah.
which is part of why we engaged in self-soothing and self-medicating, right?
Yeah.
Now, whether a person knows they're self-soothing or self-medicating, it doesn't take away what that they're doing
Exactly.
it.
Yeah. No,
Right?
for sure.
Because we could start out and say, I could start out and say, yeah, I started binge drinking because it was fun.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
and it was fun for sure,
Yeah.
but there was a part of my darkness inside that was pushing me towards binge drinking, as
Yeah.
opposed to the 98% of people around me who weren't.
Hmm.
Right, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so anyway, I think addressing all of those um concurrent disorders at the same time is something we really need to work towards, man.
Well, and
And
I agree with you. I think we need to spend more effort on these kinds of things instead of just like. And I find too, it just all kind of gets lumped together, like mental health, addictions, and whatever. But it's like, but we need to really put the effort into building out programs in those areas. Um,
100%, dude.
and that's where like I find it frustrating, as a taxpayer. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean I pay taxes. I didn't mean that, but like I don't like playing. Well, I'm a taxpayer too much,
Yeah.
but the truth is you
But
see
we
this
are.
money. Yeah, well, that's just it, and you see it go to waste so many places, or there's a lot of corporate welfare as far as
Mhm.
corporations go, just Alberta, nationally, internationally.
And it's funny, dude, you said that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is something that bugs the shit out of me that people say.
Yeah.
Like they'll come down hard on like working poor Canadians, working poor
Yes.
humans. They'll come down hard on them, man, for needing help. But
Yeah.
I don't hear anyone walking around out crying about like how the corporations need help, right? Like
Exactly.
what the fuck is that about?
Well, that's just it. Like, why do corporations that make like why does Apple need all those tax breaks so that they can
Yeah.
make you know extra billions? Like, are these
And
people not rich enough?
I get that those industries are important, right? Like I get that.
Absolutely.
But the humans who aren't in those industries have to be more important than an industry. Like what I'm saying is
Yeah.
a person has to be more valuable than an industry, right?
Well, and I think the way like, this is what bothers me and frustrates me with a lot of these conversations is if you took that same amount of wealth, those people could still live beyond anybody's wildest dreams.
Mhm.
And we could make it more equitable with them still living beyond most people's
Mhm.
wildest dreams,
Yeah.
and but be able to cover programs and be able to
Mhm.
help people, and not just but like in general, just help people,
Yeah.
homeless people, mental health, like addiction recovery,
Yeah.
disabilities, things like
I
that. Like,
In a perfect world, man, I wish
yeah.
those folks who had that money just did that on their own,
And
you
there
know?
are, I've actually read about a group of
Mhm.
like millionaires or something that
Yeah.
got together that is trying to like get government to
And see, and
tax them heavier.
those are the people I know, man. The people
Yeah.
I know who support us and support other charities and stuff. Like I can't honestly say that it would be a good idea to take money from anyone, right? Like,
Yeah.
because they earned it. Whatever they did to earn it, they earned it. Whether it was
Absolutely.
like, and don't get me wrong, like old money is old money. Somebody earned it. Like,
For sure. Yeah. No, I get you.
so, and I don't want to argue about that because, frankly, the distribution of wealth has always been off.
Oh, totally.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's so far off, like,
Yeah.
which is, it's not good. Like, I don't know what to
Yeah.
do about that. I think,
Yeah. Yeah.
like you said, if more and more people with wealth like chipped in, I
Yep.
think, like the group you mentioned, that kind of stuff takes off, man. It
Oh,
has like
for sure.
snowball effects, right?
Yeah.
Like, and fuck, it's great. Like, it's
Yeah.
brilliant, right? Seeing all the different like mechanisms of people trying to help in different places in different ways, like it's pretty fantastic.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
what's amazing is that we do have pretty good, like, we have good services. The services that
mhm,
are out there are pretty good services for like addiction recovery, mental health. There is
mhm.
some good services out there. I
Of
mean, it's
course,
not enough, but the
there's
fact that
never enough for sure.
exactly, but the fact
Yeah.
that it honestly it's still able to function to a certain degree, as a system, and actually help people and get people into recovery,
Mhm.
and do what it does. I mean, that says a lot considering how little funding it does get,
Yeah.
which says a lot about the humans involved and
Mhm.
their commitment to it.
Absolutely.
Whether it's addiction recovery
Mhm.
or rights for disabled people or whatever, it's like
Yep.
the people in there are committed to that so hard that's
Yeah.
how those things are able to move forward, and that's actually
Absolutely,
pretty
man.
amazing.
It is pretty amazing,
You
dude.
know?
Yes, you're not lying, man. It's really amazing.
Yeah, because I mean, you
It's
think if you threw 20 million more dollars at something, like, it'd be great,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you know, it is still pretty good now. Like,
But
there's still
there's
great
some
people.
things that need more than money just put into them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I think about when people are talking about, well, you should be social workers going on check on welfare calls, for example. I don't disagree with that, but
Hmm.
I would disagree with going alone.
Yes,
Okay, like
absolutely.
we've come a long way from there, especially well in Alberta specifically, where I've noticed more and more people have to work together, right?
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying every agency does that.
Yep.
I don't think that agencies can afford to do that, right?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but there are certain groups, organizations that will absolutely not work by themselves, right?
Hmm.
And that should be no different in terms of like a social worker going to check on welfares. It's all well and good, right? Because
Yeah,
I don't disagree, man. There needs to be some sort of buffer
for
between
sure.
the person who's going to enforce the law and the person who is really just having a hard time,
Yeah.
right? And because what happens is when those things go off, it's the person who's having the fucking worst day of their life, right? Probably if not in the worst place of their life, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you're there
Yeah.
for the most part to check on them. So why send a spear into a place where you need a medic or some kind of healer as opposed to
Exactly. Yeah.
right? But the healer needs protection, right?
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
it's a constant connection. We all need each other.
Yeah.
Um, it goes back to I think we were talking about it at some point on the show, probably many times through the years here because it's been a couple of years now.
It has. Yeah.
Like talking, oh fuck, man, I just lost it.
Taking a spear to
Yeah,
yeah,
I
man.
don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that was so weird. It was good too, and I was like, oh, and it was gone like a like a butterfly. It must have been like I must have been thinking about something that wasn't true. So it must not have been true. Um, but no, I really appreciate I think what I've witnessed or seem to have witnessed is more and more like at least cities and groups trying to
Yeah.
adjust this budget,
Yeah.
right? Like and like we talk about the police again because it's such a big part of the budget. That's the only reason, right?
Well, and
It's
in a
because
lot of
it's a
cases,
third. In some cases, it's a third,
yeah.
right?
And honestly, they're almost diametrically opposed to, like, it's like it's the first thing that a lot of people in addiction are going to come across
Yes,
when it comes to
absolutely. It's
government
honestly
services.
between
So,
frontline care workers,
yeah,
nurses, and police, right? Medics,
yeah,
um, and anyone else who works outreach on the street, like dope team, that kind
yep,
of stuff, right? Like, and thank God for more dope team, right? Like, I think there's
yeah,
2 teams now or
yeah,
2 separate units. It's amazing,
yeah,
and that is what I mean. I love that, and the police love that, right? Like that.
yeah.
That's the thing that I know is that the officers really love the dope team, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's in their minds, it's ideal,
Mhm.
right? It is. Look, you have these wonderful, caring humans who are going to do a way better job at this than us, right?
Yes.
Like, look, my knuckles drag when I walk. Okay. So chances are I might have a different interaction with that person than these two
Yes.
loving, compassionate humans,
Yeah. Absolutely.
right? Who are also not going to take your shit,
Yep.
but they're not going to take your shit in a different way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, because they're not the tip of the spear. They're a different part of the whole,
Yeah.
right? All necessary,
Oh,
like
yeah.
I think what did I hear once? I think if there was like probably 5 dope teams in this city, that might start like plugging the hole.
See, and that's what I mean. Like, we have a program that works well.
Mhm.
And let's say, okay, you pull the police officers, and it comes out favorably that they all like it, and
Yeah,
um, so then to me, it's like the next step is, well, let's do more of that.
100%, man.
But it seems to be, it's like, no, we gave you one.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go hire or buy a new tank so we can do no knock raids that nobody needs, and then some police departments aren't even asking for.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you need a tank and 12 SWAT team officers and more guns to
You
fight the drug war,
need a tank and 2 cannons.
right?
At
But
least
instead,
2 cannons.
but you got this program that actually does good things, and you're
Yeah,
like,
man.
no, one is good. And that's where I get really
Well,
frustrated. I think a lot of people get frustrated, right?
I agree, man. I think that's the frustration, right? Is like
Yeah.
how do we bridge this huge canyon, man, between these all essential services, man? Because I'm sorry. If you asked most Calgarians, they do not want to watch people freeze to death. They do
No,
not want to
no.
watch people like continually go back to jail. Like that
Yeah.
makes no sense, right? And so I think if you ask most people, that's the reasonable thing is like, look, how could we stop this?
Right?
Look, you have to be punished if you break the law. I get that. Okay.
Sure.
I'm not hugging a tree tonight because it's too cold outside. Right. Um, but that can't be the only thing involved. Like,
Exactly.
what are we hoping to do with these men and women if not help them? Right?
Exactly.
Like if they
Yeah.
want it, look, if you don't want it, you want to go to jail and just be in jail, that's cool. Like I get
Yeah.
it. That's your choice, right?
Yeah.
But if there's opportunities to do like more opportunities for drug court, there's more dope team,
Yep.
there's more earlier interventions,
More
right?
cultural support.
More cultural supports, like double up the Indigenous court, right?
Yeah.
Like we know there's a misrepresentation of Indigenous humans in our court system,
Yeah.
right? And so I mean, again, this is like you just said, right? Oh, this thing works really good. This is really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cut it in half
Exactly.
instead of doubling it.
Yeah.
Or
Make
just
them beg every year to keep that program.
dude, and make them jump through hoops until
Oh, yeah.
whoever the executive director is almost dead until they can
Exactly.
get the second team. right?
Yeah.
And of course, I'm just making that up from what I understand about the industry. You know,
Oh, from experience.
yeah, I think the dope team should have at least 2 or 3 more units, right?
Yeah.
I think they do a service that lots of people will like give credit to the CPS for,
Yeah.
right? Because CPS used to have to do it all,
Yeah.
right? They used to have to do all that. That's why they're like, oh, like most of the constables I know, man, are like they're a godsend,
Yeah.
right? Like whatever that is, they're a godsend.
Well, and I think we need to. I think as a society, we need to rethink the roles that we expect people to play. Like, because when I look at,
Every day we do, man. You're right.
yeah, but when I think about, like, okay, somebody has an extreme moment, neighbors called, and so police and maybe a social worker shows up. They're just they're just out of sorts that night. They had a shitty night, whatever. Things are cool,
Yeah.
but maybe, like, to show that community support, like, maybe we should have programs where those, like, that social worker can come back, or those two can come back
Mhm.
and check on the person, not because they're there on a call, not because they're trying to arrest them, just to say, we were here the other night, we're just worried about, like. So I think funding things like that, where you can show compassion,
Yeah,
where
man.
you can have more of an impact than just the moment of crisis,
Hmm.
and then but later on be like, okay, but no, we are, like, there's a little bit of support here for you, like,
Yeah.
maybe if you were in a crisis moment, maybe there's a way you can get a couple of
Hmm.
counseling sessions for free or
Well,
something,
dude, yeah, man. And if
like.
they shift the budget, you can work that in. You could work
Exactly,
it
yeah.
you could work it side by side with whatever law enforcement um, needs are there. We could
Exactly.
attach it if it's necessary,
Yeah.
right? Because I've been out on ride-alongs where back in the day before COVID, of course,
Yeah, yeah.
where the officers would ask me to talk to somebody who was there, right?
Yeah.
Just because I'm not them.
You're not in a uniform. You're not
I'm not in a uniform.
imposing.
I'm not a police officer. I'm not imposing anything on anybody, right? And
Yeah.
and you know what? They're always right. It works.
Yeah.
I'm nervous as shit, but like the truth, because I'm in front of people, and that always makes me nervous, right? Especially here on the podcast. Very, very nervous. Um, but yeah, no, it makes me nervous, but I tell you, it makes so much sense,
Yeah.
right? Like to not help them when they're identifying that that is a need, right? Because
Yeah.
most officers know that if you were to take some of these calls away from the police, they would be much less stressed,
Oh, I'm sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
how
yeah.
stressful do you think it is for someone who doesn't want to shoot someone when someone is out of their mind and on psychosis
Yeah.
and coming at them with a knife?
Well, and they haven't really been trained with anything other than their police training,
That's right.
which, okay, they have a weapon. Now I'm trained to deal with that now. But the stuff leading up to that, they're not
That's
trained for that.
that's right, man.
So, like,
And
you're
maybe there'd
just.
be less of that if there was more
Exactly.
preemptive training, right? And preemptive care.
Well, and I think too, like, like, we've kind of come to a point where it's us versus them, which is, and I think it's on, it is what it is. But I do think, like, there was a time when there was the community policing.
Mhm.
But, so if, some 16-year-old was getting in trouble that night,
Mhm.
the cops would drive him home, and
Yeah.
nothing would happen, right? Like,
Yeah.
it was just a scare more than anything. But
Mhm.
kind of, and I know that as big cities we can't have this small town feel, but I
I
do
don't
think
think
there's a
that's
lot of room
true.
for compassion,
Yeah.
and I do think if we got back to more of community
Mhm.
policing, where, yeah, they're checking on people that they know have had an issue before,
Yeah.
they're not there to do anything other than to say hi, how you doing,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, like, and talk to them for 5 minutes.
And that's been, dude,
But
you are preaching to the choir, man.
yeah.
That's been my experience with the beat policing here, with
Yeah.
going out with the beat officers, is
Yeah.
that what I've seen, and don't get me wrong, they have to get dirty sometimes. That's
Sure.
none of my business, right?
Yeah.
Because what I've seen on the regular with the majority, well, all the ones that I've been with, right, is an engagement with the public that is
Hmm.
second to none, as far as I've seen. And don't get, and I with patrol, it's the same. Like I
Hmm.
see, but again, I understand that I'm in a position where I might not see the other stuff, right?
Sure.
And so I'm not saying it's not existing. And I'm not suggesting that I'm defending anyone because I'm fucking not. Because you and I both know that I think that people who do bad shit are probably going to get punished, or at
Yeah.
least they're, you know what I mean? And I'm not
Oh,
going to
totally.
argue
Yeah.
with that. But I can't lie and also say that it's not true.
Yeah.
That I don't see this, that I don't see these beat officers walking into stores, talking to the homeless folks, like
Yeah.
making sure people aren't freezing to death. Like that's what I see,
Yeah.
right? And I doubt I'm not important enough for anyone want to impress me. So I'm sure that the majority of them would be in agreement with us, right?
Totally.
We want less enforcement in things that don't need enforcement, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where I don't want this to become a value judgment on
No,
pro or anti, whatever.
no. And
To
I'm
me,
not
it's
pro
about
police overall anyway. Like,
yeah, but to me, it's about taking like programs we know that work, or
mhm,
just putting compassion back into these systems.
that's the
Like
idea.
understanding, like let's switch to healthcare. I mean, how many people go
Mhm,
into an ER even before COVID, went into an ER or a doctor's office and came out very unhappy with what
mhm,
they just went through,
yeah.
right? Like whether they weren't listened to, they were ignored.
Mhm,
And it was 38 seconds and they had a prescription. They didn't feel like they got,
mhm.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
so we need to put the
Well, and that's
compassion back in there,
yes.
you
And
know?
you mentioned that, like, I'm glad you did because it's not just law enforcement, right? Like
Yeah,
we got to talk about the medical community, like
exactly.
how um how are mental health patients treated overall in Alberta?
Yeah,
Um, I'm going to go ahead and throw it. I'm going to wager a guess, okay, that it's not always this way, of
yeah,
course, but there is a high percentage of people who are abused in the system simply because they have mental health difficulties,
yeah,
right? And I don't know how to get around that, right? Because
yeah,
one of the essential components to the mental health system is psychiatry, right? And the most trouble that people that I encounter
yeah.
have is with psychiatrists.
Yeah,
So like you can't take the component out, right? Like how
yeah,
do you, like you said, how do we interweave compassion back in here for for a portion of the job market that's not known for their compassion,
yeah,
right? I'm not saying they're not kind and they don't care. That's not what I'm saying. But their bedside manner can oftentimes set off somebody with a mental health concern, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Like, and so, and again, I don't know, man, what people should do for their jobs and what they need to do. I get there's reasons why they're
yeah,
cold as ice or whatever. I don't know. But that's not my point. My point is
yeah,
that we can all do better. That's all. And when we're talking about law enforcement, that is one component.
yeah,
So I've spoken to family members who've lost loved ones,
yeah.
right, to this, and they had a harder time with the medical community,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, I
Like in
believe you.
terms of getting proper necessary care.
Yeah,
Right now, is that always because they're jerks? No, of course not. Sometimes the system's overwhelmed, right?
yeah. Oh, 100%.
And the
And
last 3 to 5 years, overwhelmed, right?
well, and that's what I mean. And to me, it's not about saying one profession or the other is bad. It's
Yeah.
about saying, okay, well, let's put ourselves in their
Well,
shoes. They're
well, we're not
probably
saying
oh
they're bad anyway. We're
no,
just
but
comparing the size of their budget, right?
yeah, yeah. But I
Yeah.
just think like when you're in those jobs, like you're in the healthcare profession, it's probably like you said, it's overwhelmed, especially right now.
Of
So
course
you're
it is,
overworked,
man.
you're overstressed, you have to look after more patients than you possibly are supposed to be able
Mhm.
to, but you have to. Um,
Well, when did
so
the
it's
opiate
about
crisis start?
yeah, and I think that's where, to me, that's where the compassion comes in. Is not necessarily
Hmm.
even delivering programs to end user. It's
Hmm.
how can we relieve the pressure off of these people so they can go
Exactly.
back to doing this compassionate work.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, and and take the stresses out for people.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah. Like, would it be easier um, for these different large organizations to adjust to this new like desire that humans have to be compassionate for one another?
yeah,
And I think it's weird that there's resistance towards compassion.
I
Like
do think that's
I
weird.
right? Like it's a little weird.
Yeah,
And of course, most people won't say that they're resisting compassion, they'll use like an argument of logic to
Yeah,
settle their score, right? Like in terms of treating humans like numbers. And like I get it, you can do that, and in some cases you have to, right? Like
sure,
when you're looking at large groups of people, you have to look at some numbers. I
sure,
get it, right? But like the again, the human should always outweigh the organization,
absolutely.
always,
Yeah,
right? Like, and
yeah,
we live in a wonderful country where we get free healthcare, right?
yeah,
So I think if we're going to give free healthcare, just because it's free doesn't mean we should shit on people when they come and need it, right?
exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
it's like, and I'm not saying that our medical overall, the medical, like health, mental health, medical, physical health, all that stuff, our Alberta Health in general, the workers in there are amazing, right?
mhm,
But there are also many racist workers in the
sure.
hospitals too,
Yeah,
right? Like we have examples of that being another. And now is that, as you mentioned, because you got me thinking about this now, because once you brought it over to talking about the medical profession in terms of the stressors, right? Like
yeah,
if we were to remove some of the stressors from them, would they have an easier time being compassionate?
yeah, exactly.
Right? Like
Yeah,
would just like law enforcement, if we take some of
absolutely.
these stresses that we've always assumed were inherent to those
Yeah,
jobs, but we take them from them, right? Like we also provide supports to medics,
yes,
right? We provide supports to nurses, to doctors,
yeah,
and I know there are supports for those people and reaching out. Um, but I'm thinking that those supports have to be outside the organizations, right?
yeah, yeah,
For
yeah,
for confidentiality's sake,
yeah,
because unfortunately, not all members of these large organizations trust the overall organization, and
exactly.
and that is not the individual's fault. That's
Yeah,
the organization. That's at the responsibility of the organization
for sure.
for creating an environment of distrust,
Yeah,
right? Like, and don't get me wrong, I know the organizational side would say, yeah, but we had to combat people taking advantage of our kindness,
yeah, exactly.
right? Like, okay, I get it. Um, anyway, there's more and more supports developing, even with some of these larger organizations.
Yeah,
And I think as we're talking, those are going to alleviate some of those stressors, right?
yeah, and I think for me that's like what I hate is we listen to like anytime there's a debate about healthcare and how much you should spend on it. It always comes down to like, oh, we're going to have to lay off staff or we're going to have to hire staff and pay higher wages. That's it. Those are
Mhm.
like the only things you really hear about. But it's like, but if you actually go and talk to the people doing those jobs, like maybe if you made their jobs easier, better tools to do it, meant
Yeah,
less, which would cause less stress. But like,
yeah.
if you alleviate a lot of that pressure off of them,
Mhm,
I don't think it necessarily means you have to lay off staff, you have to
mhm.
give them big raises or cut their wages. Like, but those are seem to be the only talking points when it comes to budget. And I
Well,
think that's the
because
problem is because you mentioned like you have to put humans in there.
mhm,
And so, yeah, when you're looking at a piece of paper and you're just looking at budget for this, and it's just mathematical at that point. But then you have to realize for every dollar on there, that represents like a person
mhm.
that is you're balancing out a
Yeah,
balance sheet with people.
yeah.
And that's where I'd like to see
Mhm,
more work being done on government and these agencies to
mhm,
say, no, we're not like we will negotiate wages for the nurses or the doctors or
mhm.
whatever, right? But we're also going to negotiate like our mental health programs. We're
Yeah,
going to negotiate even some support programs for our staff.
mhm.
Like negotiate those things in,
Yeah,
or and on both sides of it. Like, and that's
yeah.
what I'd like to see when I say compassion. I think that's what I mean is like let's get more compassion for the people there as well as the people coming there.
As well as the people who have to make hard decisions, right? Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
and that's the thing about like having compassion. When
Yeah.
I think it's important to have it as well, always if I can, but
Yeah.
like especially when it's hard, right? Like
Yeah.
because I think that requires more compassion, not
Yeah.
less. And
Exactly.
I'm not sure I'm equipped for that yet, but I think I think that's probably what it requires, right?
Yeah.
To cross the threshold into just that kind of universal love for other living things.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess, and that goes off on a tangent of its own. But
It does. But I just
yeah,
thought the budget thing was kind of interesting because it
dude, it's
just made
super
me,
interesting.
yeah, it just made me think about how little we spend on some programs. Like
Hmm.
really realistically, let's take a one thing that drives me nuts is when it snows in Calgary, if you're in a wheelchair, you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
Why aren't we spending money on a program to clean the goddamn sidewalks
Hmm.
so people can get around?
Yeah.
But it's things like that. Like you
Hmm.
don't, a lot of people probably don't think of that, but it's like, but that inconveniences, and not just inconveniences, it cripples, like it just shuts down a certain portion of the population
It does.
from being able to access services, from
Hmm.
even being able to get to work. So
Hmm.
we need to have more things like that, where it's like, well, let's get those things dealt
Hmm.
with, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but yeah,
agree, man.
anyways, that's what it makes me
Well,
think of.
what we were talking about is what reminds me of what Arthur and I were talking about when him and I met for a coffee. You
Yeah,
remember Arthur from the police?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and he's very community oriented, right? And
yeah.
so we were talking about if they could take some of that budget for justice and create institutions specifically for drug court issues, mental health issues,
Yes.
right? And then have more of those in less prisons, right? Like,
Yep.
or take prisons, cut them in half.
Hmm.
Have half of it is rehabilitation,
Yep.
right? And half of it is the people who just want to chill and do their time,
Sure.
right? Like,
Yeah.
which is fair too, because they have a right to that, right? Like,
Yeah. Absolutely.
um, but I don't know. Something's got to give on the like in the big scheme of things. Something has to change,
Yeah, I
right?
think so
Because
too.
I think it's changing in individuals, right? Like
Yes.
there's individuals that are like you mentioned the group earlier. There's just more and more individuals giving a shit, right? And
Yeah.
doing something about it.
Yeah.
So if there are more and more individuals giving a shit and doing something about it, then like something's going to change eventually.
Eventually, governments will change
It just
policies.
takes time to
Yep.
push up that high, right? Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. What do you think? Speaking of the government being pressured to do shit, what do you make of these ding dongs that stormed the Capitol?
Well,
All I could think of was Trump, dude. Somebody said they stormed the Capitol, and I was like, oh, it's very Trumpian.
yeah, right. I have to say, this just drives me nuts because it's like I fully support everybody's right to protest.
Of course, man.
If
Me
they
too.
wanted to drive
100%.
those trucks onto Parliament grass, park them, and set up camp for the next
Yep.
8 months,
Yep.
don't care. But when you start like beating up homeless people so that you can get a meal at the shelter,
Yeah.
or blocking off ERs so that
Hmm.
nobody can get there, like
Yeah.
honestly, those people need to be going put in jail. Like,
Dude, and waving Nazi flags and doing all that
yeah,
shit. Like, what
yeah,
is
like
that, dude?
that stuff's just over the top. Like that's just,
Holy smokes, man.
so like I agree. If you don't want the vaccine, just you go protest
Yeah.
your little heart out, go wave your
I,
signs.
yep.
But, and the other thing that really irritates me is you watch the West and East Coast, you watch a certain portion of the population who protests expansion on their territory, on
Hmm.
their land, and they will get moved by SWAT teams and sniper rifles
Hmm.
and canines trained to attack,
And tanks.
and tanks and fully militarized RCMP
Hmm.
death squads, as far as I'm
Hmm.
concerned. And then you watch these guys and they get welcomed into Ontario. They get, well, how can we support you? Well, let's bring you some food. Let's take care of you. And they're literally choking off things. They're
Yeah.
shutting down the economy.
Do you think that is
Like,
like do you think that is the liberal mindset that people talk about? That no, it's okay, like even though I agree with their right to protest too, right? But not
yeah,
the right to like hurt people or
absolutely.
or continue hurtful speech or hurtful
Yeah.
actions, whatever it is, right? Like I'm
Nope.
not for that. Um, but do you think that that plays a part in that?
What's that? That
Shit,
they
I've
get
lost it.
welcomed?
Yeah, that they get welcomed
Oh,
is
100%
because,
it does.
but
Yeah.
it doesn't explain the differences in how they're treated, right? Like that doesn't explain that because there is no reason why the two methods are so different,
Yeah.
right? Between when the RCMP invades indigenous land,
Yeah.
like that's an invasion,
Mm-hmm.
right? However, um, they we treat this so differently when and I get it, man. People will be like, wow, there's just reasons why you got to do it different, and there'll be political answers, and there'll be bureaucratic answers, and there'll be
Yep.
law enforcement's right answers, and then there'll be like the religious right answers and all these different things. But the truth remains that they get treated better,
100%.
right? Like
There's less
it,
guns pointed at them.
much less
So
guns.
let's I always do this with people. Like I compare. Okay, so you got indigenous protesters that are protesting a pipeline.
Yeah.
What is the big hate because they're protesting that pipeline? Is because you're shutting down jobs. God damn it! Those are jobs we need. We need to move that product to market. You literally have the exact same thing. It's a method of transporting products. That's all it is. I'm in supply chain management. When you talk in classes about pipelines and trucks, it doesn't matter. So you literally have the pipeline now protesting and shutting down, but people aren't like, there's people that are supporting this, and those are the same people that will scream about the lost jobs when indigenous protest a pipeline.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why they have any support. How they've raised $8 million is beyond me.
And
I don't know how
sadly,
any
I
of
am
them have
not
their trucks
surprised.
still. I'm not. I can't
Yeah.
believe they should be towed.
Yeah.
Because as far as I know, it's even illegal to create a convoy on the highway.
Is
As far
it?
as I know.
Probably under the Traffic Safety Act, right?
Yeah, because I mean, nobody can pass you. Nobody
Yeah.
can. It gets dangerous.
Yeah.
So like, I'm just, to me, the discrepancy there is just drastic and should be in your face, clear that Canada clearly has a racial issue.
I just, it's one more example of people turning away from what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Like one more example of
Yeah.
another time to ignore the residential schools and
Yeah.
the children and the survivors. And um, I know there's nothing else we can do except for continue to support the indigenous like folks who are going through this.
Yeah.
I don't really know how that support looks except for like keep like talking, letting them talk, share and learning about it, because I tell you, it sickens me, man, to think that like
Yeah.
not the protests, right, but it's the racism that comes out in a portion of that group
Yes.
that ruins the whole thing for the whole group as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
Right, because aligning yourself with that is pretty challenging, man. Like,
Yeah. Well, I wonder how people would feel if like you had a protest where people were advocating for like waving flags that represented the death of hundreds of thousands of white people, or you know, like they probably wouldn't appreciate that. But for some reason nowadays, waving a Nazi flag has become totally okay.
yeah, but I
And I
think it
don't.
brings up
Go
dude, I
ahead.
think it, no, I'm sorry, man. Like
No.
I think it brings up the undercurrent of anti-Semitism that has been in North America forever.
Which I
Right?
don't even
Like,
understand.
I
But
have absolutely no idea where it comes from. But then again, I am not 100% sure why there's racial bigotry at all.
yeah,
Right?
I agree.
I get that it's a thing, but I'm not 100% sure why.
Yeah.
And so also not 100% sure about that either.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
But yeah, no, these guys are just, I don't know, these, and I just, it really bothers me the way it's being treated,
Yeah.
dealt with kid gloves. Everybody's like, no, they're protesting. Well, yeah, I've been to other protests where people don't get treated that well.
Well, and I
And
think
not
it's
just
gotta,
indigenous protests
yep.
either, like, like anti-hate rallies and stuff like that, like people with signs, and they're,
Yeah.
they're not treated that well. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of like, it really does seem to be like who you are matters when it
It
comes
really
to this.
does matter. It makes a difference, like who you represent.
Well, and I
Right.
think
And
this too is a lot of political parties have thrown in with this camp over the years. And so I think for that reason, there's a lot of political pressure to not, you know what I
of
mean?
course, there's got to be
Yeah.
people who are like, well, we got to do this a certain way, right?
because it's our base. And
Yeah, and well, I mean, no, it's because they're people
that's right.
and
That's right. They're Canadians and they have rights all of a sudden.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
Canadian citizens as
Yeah.
opposed to indigenous citizens, you bastards. Um, what when you were talking about the RCMP and their death squad, I was like, dude, it really is. And if you're on the other side of the barrel of
Yeah.
those guns, absolutely right. Like
Yeah.
think about that group of people with their balaclavas coming onto your territory, right? Like what do you think they're going to do? They're
Well,
not there to hug you,
no, no,
right?
no. The story that got me was oh Jesus, maybe 10 years ago now. But there was a soldier that came back from Middle East, named Greg Matters, and I don't know what rank he was or anything,
But he
but
matters.
yeah, and he had heavy PTSD, and
Hmm.
they murdered him.
Oh,
They lied about it, and nothing ever happened. And
oh man.
it was their special enforcement team that had to go from
Yeah.
across Canada. We flew them all the way out to BC, and within a few hours they murdered the guy, knowing. And the worst part is they knew he had PTSD.
Yeah.
So they showed up at nighttime with helicopters in full military, like paraphernalia, like guns, everything,
Just
right?
to make him feel comfortable then.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason they were there was because he got in a fist fight with his brother earlier in the day.
Jesus. So they couldn't have waited till the next day to just arrest him. Like, what a bunch
So
of
it
goons.
was a story like that, and then
They're
I was in
goons.
contact with his mom a
Hmm.
little bit, and we kind of interacted online, just through text messages and stuff. And it was pretty heartbreaking, it's made me realize, like, they're okay with shooting a former Canadian military. That means they're okay with shooting anybody.
Oh yeah, man.
Like, as much as the race does play an issue in a lot of issues today, I think there's a lot of cases where those squads are there to do one thing, and
Mhm.
then they'll do it
Yeah.
if they're called.
And
You
and
know.
I think when you mention military, they'll go through different measures if it's a non person of color
Yes,
military
I'm sure
member.
they will. Yeah,
The measures that are taken, I assume, are different, right? Because
I would hope. Yeah,
well, I mean, I assume they're
yeah,
different only because there is such a difference in treatment of indigenous and black people and people of color
yeah.
that is much worse than it is for guys like me,
Oh,
right? Like,
totally. Yeah,
and obviously, you know, I couldn't possibly understand the other side of that, right?
right.
So, but I can say it must be worse. That's all I can say
Yeah,
is it must be worse because I've seen people so afraid of the police that it makes you shake, thinking
yeah,
what happened to them,
yeah,
right? What happened to them, and I'm not going to judge what happened to them, right? Like,
yeah,
because oftentimes what happens to them is exactly what they say.
yeah,
They get pulled out and they get the shit beat out of them,
yeah,
right? For fears that are founded in like absolute ignorance, right? Like,
yeah.
um, and so anyway, I don't want to get off on that tangent.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, but yeah, back to those truckers.
Yeah.
I think it's a real shame that
Hmm.
that's being dealt with the way it is, and that
I do
it's not.
too.
And I think we all have to realize too, like, these guys literally represent the smallest minority of truckers, and I use that loosely only in the sense that I'm not convinced that all of the people involved there are actual truckers. Even the ones driving trucks, I'm not sure if they're all truckers.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I
It,
don't want to give the trucking industry like, oh, you guys are all like this, because they're not.
no,
Like, the
of course not,
vast
man.
vast majority are vaccinated. They're going to
Yeah.
work. They're not in Ottawa shitting on the
And if we
cart
talk
on the
about
ground around.
professions in
Mhm.
general, we're
Yeah,
talking about it in general. We don't
yeah,
like we at no point in time do I ever think that every person in
no,
this profession is
you
a
can't.
shitheel. Not at all, right? Like
Well, that'd
it's
be
just
hypocrisy if you're just going to do that and then turn around and go, but you
exactly
shouldn't
right.
hate people.
I know. Well, and the only thing that's concerns but it concerns me about both. It concerns me about many movements actually,
Yeah,
like where these unsavory groups get like wrapped up inside this really good movement, right?
yeah,
Like because it's not a bad thing that people want to protest the measures. Like that's
Nope.
what, dude, that's why I live in this country, bro. Like I
Yeah.
appreciate that shit.
That's what that Charter of Rights is
Well,
for.
what
Like,
I don't appreciate is protecting racists. I don't
no.
appreciate that. I don't appreciate, and again, there's probably a good portion of the people that are on this like movement that don't appreciate it, right?
Yeah.
And I hope that if once they find out they have this like hidden portion of their group, like maybe they bail out,
Yeah.
right? Like because people aren't beyond redemption no matter what.
Yeah.
But it has to be looked at for what it is, right? I mean,
Well,
but we heard it for the whole time with Black Lives Matter, man.
yep.
A lot of these same people who are like, "Oh no, but we're not all racist." Those are the same people who were like saying, "Well, Black Lives Matter is a crooked organization and blah blah blah."
Exactly.
Like, obviously, there's a portion, like, but again, we're talking about organizations that have like um lots of different characters in them,
Yeah.
right? Like so many different characters, so many
Yeah.
different personalities. Like there's just so much going on in these organizations because they're loose organizations,
Yeah.
right? They're not necessarily everybody goes to the same office every day, right? Like
Yeah.
these are organizations that gather via the internet,
Yep.
right? And by other means,
For sure.
so anyway, and it's on both sides. It's on all sides, right?
Yeah.
Like the difficulty with um, weeding through that, I think, is because it is so prevalent in every large organization.
Yeah.
It just eventually people get crooked.
Well, and I think, I mean, there's a certain
Some
amount of
people do,
people.
not everybody. Of
Well, and
course.
there's a certain amount of people that will see opportunities to like, oh, there's people protesting. Oh, I'm going to go throw rocks at a building and get them in
Dude,
trouble.
100%, man.
So like that, yeah, that's going to happen, and I get that.
Yep.
But like when it's not even like, I mean, the racism is terrible, but like for me, it's the what they're doing while they're there.
Yeah.
Like they're expecting homeless shelters to feed them, and they've blocked off the streets so bad that homeless people can't get to the shelters now.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It's like,
Well,
you
they're
guys,
desecrating stuff that they complain about other people
yeah,
desecrating.
exactly.
Right?
Like they're all
Yeah.
against knocking down names on buildings, but they'll go shit on the unknown soldier grave.
Yeah.
And they'll go, take dumps on Terry Fox. Like, what the hell, man?
Those are two statues they should have left alone. Like
Well,
they
that's what
should have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like who?
Like,
Who
what a
has
way to piss
sympathy?
off more Canadians
Yeah.
than you. But like,
But that shows you that their goal is not about masks or vaccines.
exactly.
Their goal is about shit, right?
Yeah, it's about causing shit and making
Yeah.
lots of donations and making the press.
Lots of donations of shit.
Yeah. Well, that too, probably.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when they have speaker nights.
But anyways,
shit,
now that we've solved the world's problems.
Yeah. Well, and I just like occasionally talking about these things because I find that I really don't have an opinion on things unless people are getting hurt, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
because people get hurt by hate signs and hate speech,
Yep.
that's one of those things that bugs me, right? Like, and I think it bugs most of us, to be honest with you. Like, I think it bugs most people, and having said that, I don't really know how many people are racist and how many people aren't, right? Like,
I don't know.
I wish it was easy to see today, but it's just not, right? It is so tricky, man, because there are things that we say as humans that sometimes we just never gave a thought to, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, whoa, dude, like you can't say that, right?
Right.
Or you don't do that, man. Like, don't do that. Like, that's a bad idea, man. And I just think it's good. I think we gotta figure this shit out, man. Part of it is like we kept talking about earlier, that compassion. All we're trying to do by causing less harm is like be more compassionate, more loving.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Like, and loving and compassion doesn't mean tolerance of bad behavior, right?
Exactly.
What it means is let's find a more applicable solution to this bad behavior, considering our plans previously have not fucking worked.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like there's countries out there that are shutting down their prisons,
Yep.
their school programs that are at the top of the world every year, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
we should just do more of that. That's where
Dude,
we need to start focusing. You
and
know,
I agree, man. Like on the structures that we have already in place, let's start restructuring those, man.
yeah, like
Like
modernize them. Like these are all.
yeah, turn prisons to change prisons, man.
Well, you got to remember, all of these systems are built on like late mid 1800s
Hmm.
British colonialism.
Yeah, man.
Like,
Like
do you think we maybe
seriously,
should update the systems a little bit?
dude, I don't get it, man.
But,
And I know there's like programs available in federal prison and stuff like that,
yeah,
but there just needs to be more, less punitive and more like rehabilitative,
I
right?
think so.
Like
Yeah,
that's all I'm thinking, man. Like
yeah,
I am encouraged to hear about all this talk. Like it seems to be very popular right now, man, about decriminalization.
yes,
What's happening, like in, is it Edmonton? Edmonton thinking about it?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah, like, and
I think it was. I think it was Edmonton.
I know that in BC, a
Yeah,
couple places
yeah.
um, have gone for that. I don't know if they have it yet, but
Yeah, I'm not sure.
man, that is a good sign, dude. It's a good
Totally.
sign. Yeah,
Yeah,
I know people are gonna. It's gonna be really chaotic for a while, right? Or at least it could be very chaotic for a while.
yeah.
But again, so could have legalizing marijuana, right?
Well, but the thing is that this isn't new either.
No.
There's other countries, and not just one or two. There's like five,
Yeah.
six, 7 countries that have all decriminalized or legalized
Mhm.
all drugs, ended the
Yeah.
war on drugs,
Yeah, man.
and those are the ones that are seeing decreases in violence crime,
Yeah.
decreases in petty crimes, decreases in vehicle thefts, decreases in
Mhm.
their healthcare spending, decreases on, like, so your
Mhm.
justice system is relieved of its stress.
Yep.
People are getting back to work, they're getting
Mhm.
healthy, they're feeling connected again. Like, that's what we want in a society, with
100%.
people pulling their bootstraps up and getting to work.
Mhm.
Well, let's give them some boots to wear, and maybe they can
Yeah.
do that,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yep. Agreed, man.
yeah,
Well, we've solved all the problems of
that's
the
right. I feel
universe.
good.
Yeah, man, I feel like we dug up more problems than we started with. That's my feeling, and I'm gonna stick with that. That's okay though, because I mean, discussions, I don't know, we didn't really solve nothing, but we sure talked about some shit. So
Well, and I think it's important to talk about it.
I
I
agree,
do.
man. I agree because there needs to be. I just feel that I don't know if there what needs to happen. I shouldn't say that, but I believe one of the things that needs to happen is a restructuring, reprioritizing of our justice system in general, right? And that includes law enforcement, but it's not specific to law enforcement.
No, no.
It's
Courts,
the whole
everything, like
gamut,
the whole
man.
thing.
Probation, parole, everything,
Absolutely.
right? Like
Yeah.
we just need to and I don't know, maybe we don't need to burn the whole thing down, but we certainly need to like redo some rooms. Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
in this house. This house is fucking old and we
Yeah.
need to redo some rooms,
It needs a few fresh
right?
coats of paint and stuff.
Just a few coats of paint. That's it. No
Yeah,
big deal, right?
exactly.
Yeah, man.
Right on, man.
Right
Well,
on,
man.
brother. Yeah, you can turn that record off. It was really good chatting with you, dude.
Yeah, man. It was awesome.